Hello, and welcome back to Growing Up in Scientology. Today we're going to do a Q&A video. I've really been looking forward to this because I don't have to type up any talking points or bullet points. I'm just going to read the question and answer it. These are not in any particular sequence. If a question comes up and it's redundant, I'll just kind of pass on it. But I've just kind of copied and pasted them in this document as they've come in on YouTube or as they've come in on Facebook or email or whatever. And well, here we go. It's like these are not categorized by subject. We're going to be all over the place here. Okay, first question. What is the difference between what you did to leave and the protocol that the church deems required in order to leave? If you follow their rules and leave with their permission, are you not declared suppressive? From what I've read, that seems to be rare. Why is this? That more people don't follow the church's protocol for leaving. Okay, so the one thing that we have to differentiate here, though, is this question referring to leaving staff, leaving the Sea Org, or leaving Scientology? And the difference between all that is probably the subject of another video. But I'm going to assume that this means leaving the Sea Org. Well, actually, I'm going to assume that the question has a misunderstanding. I'm going to assume that this question is referring to me leaving the Sea Org, and also assuming that when I left the Sea Org, I left Scientology. Because this comment came from a video where I said the way I left the Sea Org was I just went to the ethics officer and said, my wife is pregnant and we're not getting an abortion. And she said, okay, great, and handed me the paper that has the steps you have to follow to leave the Sea Org. So let me clarify something. When people leave the Sea Org, that usually does not mean they are leaving Scientology. The exceptions to this is if someone has to escape from the Sea Org. And again, I'm going to explain, I'm not sure if we're going to get into it on this video or a future video, why you hear stories of people having to escape, and then why you hear stories of well, I just said, okay, we're leaving. The stories you hear of people having to actually escape the Sea Org are usually from three categories of people, or three categories of experiences. People who were in the Sea Org at international management, which is located on a secret base in the middle of the desert in California. Now, it's secret because Scientologists don't know where it is. Sea Org members don't know where it is. The rest of the world that just uses Google knows where the hell it is. But the location of the international base is confidential in the world of Scientology. Because stuff was so crazy at INT, and because David Miscavige is such a tyrant, let me jump in with something here. The international management base is surrounded by razor wire and guarded fence by guards who I'm not sure if they're always armed but have access to arms. The fence is patrolled by dirt bikes and ATVs, and that fence, to the people who are in the base, they probably just say, well, that fence is there to keep people out because this base is so special and super secret. Those people on that base know darn well that the fence is also to keep people in. And it doesn't, that fact doesn't necessarily make them prisoners. I'm just saying the security guards who monitor that base are tasked with making sure no one comes in without permission and making sure no one gets out without permission. I like to use the analogy of compare it to the army, compare it to an army base. Soldiers are not allowed to just get up and leave. They would be AWOL and they would be court-martialed, and if they were captured, they'd be thrown into prison and do some real time. It really is helpful to think of the Sea Org or think of the policies of the Sea Org in that way. That's how, that same operating basis is how the Sea Org works. They're like, yeah, you can leave, but you're going to leave by following our policies and procedures. So that brings us to this question. What is the difference between what you did to leave and what the protocol deems required to leave? There is no difference. When I left the Sea Org, I followed the right way to leave the Sea Org. When I left the Sea Org, I was not leaving Scientology. I was in Scientology for another 10 years. I wasn't necessarily on course. I wasn't getting any auditing, but I considered myself a Scientologist. I thought I was a Scientologist. My friends thought I was a Scientologist. I hung out with Scientologists. The church thought I was a Scientologist, and that makes you a Scientologist. So the protocol that is required to leave the Sea Org is very simple. There might be a whole lot of steps on the pieces of paper that list the steps, but there's only one step that's important. You have to get a sec check. A sec check is short for security check, and a security check is basically a confessional type process, except it uses the e-meter, and you're obligated to confess, right? So a security check is a list of questions asking if you have done these things wrong. Have you ever, I don't have a specific recollection of the questions, but they're going to be of this sort. Have you ever, oh my God, they're so generic, and some of them are also so specific. Have you ever lied? Have you ever misrepresented? Have you ever falsified a statistic? Have you ever said something negative about David Miscavige? Have you ever stolen anything from the org? Have you ever done anything sexually inappropriate with another Sea Org member? Have you ever, is there anything you're hiding? Is there anything you don't want me to find out about you? So these are the questions, and you get asked these questions while holding the cans of the e-meter, and the auditor, or in this case you would call it the sec checker, is looking to make sure that the e-meter, is either giving or not giving certain reactions to these questions. And I don't want to talk about sec checks for too long, but this is basically the process you go through where the church has an opportunity to make sure they have all the goods on you. Now, I know Scientologists would object to my describing a sec check that way. The Scientologist would say a sec check is your opportunity to unburden yourself of any harmful things you've done that you are withholding, that if you left right now without coming clean would affect your relationship with the organization moving forward. I can't help but quickly mention the TV show The Path. If you're watching this video, please watch this TV show. There are so many things about Scientology that I try to explain that in my mind I'm going, my God, if this person had just seen The Path, I could reference a certain part of the TV show and they would completely understand what I'm talking about. So The Path is all about a cult. It's about Scientology, and I'm probably going to do a whole other video about that at a later time. So a Scientologist would say that a sec check is your opportunity to completely unburden yourself so that you can move on with a clean heart and continue to love the organization. And if you leave staff or leave the Sea Org without getting a sec check, that is basically the wrong way to leave staff or leave the Sea Org. If you do that, you have a very good likelihood of being declared a suppressive person. If you get a sec check before you leave, you're going to be fine. You're going to be allowed to keep calling yourself a Scientologist, and the church is going to treat you like you're fine. You might have to jump through a bunch of hoops to make amends for these things that you've divulged in your sec check. But you're not going to be kicked out of the church. When most people leave the Sea Org, they're just leaving the Sea Org. They're still Scientologists. They go from being a Sea Org member to just being a public Scientologist. Okay, so let's see. If you follow their rules and leave with their permission, are you not declared a suppressive person? Exactly. And this is also why when people do decide to leave and not do it the right way, not get a sec check, the Scientologists who are still in and the family members who are still in who disconnect from this person, this is why they will be able to say with a relatively clean conscience that this person made the decision. This person made the decision to do what he did and suffer the ramifications because all he had to do was follow the church's rules and life would have just gone on as normal. He didn't have to do it the wrong way. So you might be asking the question, well, why would someone choose to leave without getting a sec check versus just getting a sec check and leaving the right way? Usually the reason comes down to whether the person wants to leave right away or not. It can take weeks or months to do and complete a sec check. The church is not bending over backwards to provide you an auditor to deliver this sec check. They don't give a shit. They know that they have this pressure they're exerting on you where they're like, well, you've got to do it. You've got to do this or else you're going to be declared. And we know you don't want to be declared, so we don't have to do you any favors and make this fast for you. We don't have to do you any favors and make this easy for you. So you're gonna go through this process at our pace. We're gonna decide where you fit into our priorities. If someone is like, no, I've had enough, I'm leaving right now, and there's nothing you can do to stop me, and they leave, they can do that. There's only certain instances where someone has to physically break free. And again, one of those instances is people who are at the international management base. If they want to leave without getting a sec check, they will have to plan an escape. No one's just going to open the frickin' gates for them. If someone is on the RPF, and I really don't want to define all of this right now. I feel like if you're watching this video, you probably know what the RPF is. It's basically the rehabilitation camp for wayward Sea Org members. If you're on the RPF and you decide that you want to leave, and you want to leave now, yeah, they're not just going to open up that door for you and let you walk out. You're going to have to plan an escape. And I'm trying to think. I feel like I had three categories. If you're on the ship, if you're on the Freewinds, which is the church's private cruise ship, and you want to leave now, yeah, you're going to have to plan an escape. They're not letting you off that gangplank. But otherwise, your average Sea Org member or your average staff member could just go to their fellow workers and say, all right, I'm out of here, F off, and walk out the door and never come back. And they're not going to be restrained. They're not going to be imprisoned. They're not going to be locked in a closet. I mean, maybe, but they're not. That would be highly unusual. Okay, let's see. From what I've read, this seems rare. No, it is not rare. People leave the Sea Org all the time. In fact, I did a video earlier this week about the hate website that the church put up on me, and that my sister-in-law is one of the people who did one of the videos about what a dick I am. And when she did that video, she was in the Sea Org. She left the Sea Org 3 weeks later. She's out of the Sea Org. Now, she's still in Scientology, but she's not in the Sea Org. So it happens all the time. You just don't hear about it because it's just freaking normal. Why is it that more people don't follow the church's protocol for leaving? Tons, thousands of people have followed the proper protocol for leaving, but mainly because they wanted to keep being a Scientologist. Okay, moving on. If Disconnection was canceled, would people go back? No, that's got nothing to do with people going back into Scientology. So let's take me. My younger brother is still claiming to be a Scientologist. He's not. He's bullshitting. He's claiming to be a Scientologist, and in order to keep looking like a Scientologist, he's disconnected from me. If Disconnection were canceled, all that would happen is that the people who've been kicked out of Scientology would be able to talk to their family members again. It wouldn't mean that those people who'd been kicked out or left Scientology would go back into Scientology. Because here's something that I want to make sure everyone understands. It is absolutely possible to get back into Scientology after Scientology has labeled you a suppressive person and kicked you out. It's absolutely possible. People do it all the time. I know people who've done it. No, I shouldn't mention anybody specific. So that is why I'm saying if Disconnection were canceled, no, that would have nothing to do with people rejoining the Church of Scientology. Okay. How do former Sea Org members restart their lives at 30, 40, or 50 with no friends, no family, money, job experience outside the Church of Scientology, or credit history? How can non-Scientologists help people escape or restart their lives after they escape? Okay, let's treat this as two questions. How do former Sea Org members restart their lives at 30, 40, or 50 with no friends, no family, no money, no job experience, no credit history? Okay, let's correct some things in this question. Let's correct some things that the question seems to imply. No friends, no family. Well, that's not true. Just because you've been in the Sea Org for 20, 30, 40, 50 years doesn't mean you don't have friends outside of the Sea Org, and it doesn't mean you don't have family. It doesn't mean you don't have Scientology family outside the Sea Org, and it doesn't mean you don't have non-Scientology family. I think one of the best answers here is that most people who've been in the Sea Org for decades and decades and decades, the first place they do go is their family. I think the question might imply when Sea Org members leave the Sea Org and if they had to escape, and so now they're no longer in Scientology. So now they've lost all of their network, if you will. Well, if you've been in the Sea Org for 40 years and you have absolutely no family outside of Scientology, you're probably not going to stage an escape from the Sea Org. There's a few exceptions to that, but there's always exceptions to anything. Okay, no money. A lot of people, I would say, simply have friends and family willing to help them out with money. Of course, there's exceptions. No job experience. You know what? Working in the Sea Org is very similar. The jobs in the Sea Org are not necessarily religious in nature. I mean, in fact, most of them have nothing to do with anything religious. They're like real jobs that translate into experience in the real world. Now, because you can't say I spent 20 years working for Microsoft as an administrative assistant, and you have to say I spent 20 years working for the Church of Scientology, the time spent doing that work probably doesn't carry as much weight or value on a resume. But I sort of reject the idea that time spent in the Sea Org does not translate into job experience. I completely reject that idea. Most of the jobs in the Sea Org do, I won't say most, many of the jobs in the Sea Org do translate into real world experience in the actual world. And so you'd be surprised how easy it can be for Sea Org members who leave to land on their feet pretty quickly. One thing that Sea Org members have going for them is they're used to working 90, 100 hours a week for shit food and shit pay. And no rights. No civil rights, no vacation, no bargaining power, no nothing. They are the ultimate worker. They're the ultimate worker. And in the society that we live in, business owners fall all over themselves to find people willing to, who aren't going to bitch about working overtime, or who aren't going to, bitch that they make $1 less than, they found out their coworker makes $1 more than them, and all of a sudden they hate their job. Sea Org members are hard workers. They are, for the most part, very genuine people and just want to help. They're used to thinking that their job is in somehow helping the entire world. So even if a Sea Org member were to leave and start flipping burgers at McDonald's, I guarantee you that person's sitting there thinking about, in his head, how somehow flipping these burgers is helping the world. And he's going to love his job, and he's going to work hard at it, and he's not going to bitch about $10 an hour. So it is not hard for former Sea Org members to find jobs. Now, if someone leaves the Sea Org and they're already at kind of retirement age, well, I sure hope they have friends or family willing to help them out, because they're going to have a really hard time. So let's see, credit history. Some of these Sea Org members do have credit. It doesn't take much to get a secured credit card. A Sea Org member, it's not out of the question for a Sea Org member, even one who doesn't have any friends or family willing to loan the money or anything, to figure out how to save up $500. Yes, you can save up $500 even making $50 a week. I know it sounds crazy, but you can. You can save up $500 and get a $500 secured credit card through the local bank, and eventually you've got actually fantastic credit history because you've never defaulted. In 30 or 40 years, you've never even had a late payment. So I know the public at large looks at the Sea Org and they hear the stories of the Sea Org and they think, oh my God, these guys have no options. They're trapped. It's terrible. There's a lot of stories that do illustrate just how terrible the conditions in the Sea Org can be, and just how much Sea Org members can be mistreated. But when you just see a Sea Org member walking down the street, you shouldn't necessarily think that they're just completely have absolutely no options and are trapped there. That's not true for most Sea Org members. And I'm not trying to be an apologist for any of this. I'm just trying to speak factually. Okay, next question. How can non-Scientologists help people escape or restart their lives after the escape? I kind of reject the idea that people have to escape the Sea Org. Mind you, I know of many examples, and I know we've all heard of many examples where people literally have to escape. It's in the vast minority, and they are incredible stories, and they are important because they are real. And any organization where even one person has to escape is an organization that has some serious problems that need to be addressed. But I don't want to characterize it as people need to figure out how to help Sea Org members escape. Sea Org members leave the Sea Org all the time. And just to reiterate, please remember that 95 to 99% of the time when someone leaves the Sea Org, they're not leaving Scientology. And they do still have a support network around them of people who are willing to help them and hire them, and most of them have families, guys. If a Sea Org member leaves the SO and they're still a Scientologist, Scientology business owners fall over themselves to hire these guys because of how accustomed they are to working really, really hard for crap pay. All right, let's see. Why does the Sea Org base in Hemet have razor wire while the other Sea Org members in Clearwater can walk through the streets? I think I've addressed that. It has to do with the confidential nature of the international management base. It has to do with the fact that David Miscavige has his offices at the international management base. He wants it to be a secured, fortified facility. And I'm not minimizing the fact that the fence prevents people from leaving. I'm just saying the fence, it's more likely the fence is there so David Miscavige can feel protected. That is the greater purpose the fence serves, even though it also does prevent people from leaving. Again, not trying to be an apologist, just telling it how it is. Are there safe houses for Sea Org members to go to when they escape? No, and I think I've covered that concept. Why would the Church of Scientology hire Monique Yignling, who is a Catholic, to represent them? Well, who cares if she's a Catholic? She's a lawyer. And she's hired because she's a lawyer, not because she's a Catholic. But don't get me wrong. The question has merit here. I think the question should be, why would the Church of Scientology hire a non-Scientologist to represent them? I think it's for plausible deniability reasons. Monique has been working for the church for decades. She's made millions and millions of dollars representing the church, and she gets to say she's Catholic, so she gets to be a sympathetic figure when she appears on 2020 and lies her ass off for the Church of Scientology. She has the luxury of talking about Scientology at an arm's length. She doesn't have to defend it as a member. She doesn't have to defend its beliefs. She can sit there and say, well, sure, that's weird to me, but I'm a Catholic and I believe X, Y, and Z, and that's weird to other people. You know, kind of like Will Smith tried to do when he was pretending not to be a Scientologist. He's not a Scientologist now, but there was a period where he was and then was pretending not to be and would say things like that. Oh, people talk about the Scientologists and they say X, Y, and Z, but I'm a Christian and I believe A, B, and C. Anyway, that's bullshit. Okay, so I think I've answered that question. It's for plausible deniability reasons. That's really it. Okay, next question. How can a freeloader debt be legally enforceable when the person signed it as a child? The freeloader debt is, let's define it first. A freeloader debt is when someone is on staff in a regular Scientology organization. They serve a 2.5-year contract or a 5-year contract. They can do all the Scientology that they can figure out how to do while they're a staff member, and it's free. Obviously, you're giving them your life, you're giving them their time, but you don't have to pay money to do Scientology while you're a staff member. If you break your contract, if you don't fulfill the 2.5 years or the 5 years, depending on which one you signed, then they give you a bill at full price, no special discount for being a member of the International Association of Scientologists. They give you a bill for full price for everything you did. In the Sea Org, there aren't 2.5-year contracts or 5-year contracts. It's a billion-year contract. So it's not possible to fulfill your Sea Org contract. So while you're in the Sea Org, technically you're giving them your life, but you don't have to pay them money to do Scientology. Any auditing you get or any courses that you get are free of charge. How generous of them. But when you leave the Sea Org, even if you do it the right way, they give you a bill, full price, for anything you've ever done in Scientology, even if you've been in for 25 years. The first time I left staff, I was 17 years old. I was given a bill for $100,000. And I don't think I've ever told that story of what I did for the next 2 years, but I moved to LA and I messed around and then I went back to Philadelphia and I finished my contract. And I'm not going to tell that whole story right now. I was 17 years old and they handed me a $100,000 bill. And because until a Scientologist pays that bill, they're not allowed to do any other Scientology services. So for the 2 years that I was living in LA, just messing around, I had nothing to do with Scientology for 2 years. Until I then went back to Philadelphia, finished the last 2 years on my contract so that I wouldn't have this debt. See, I still considered myself a Scientologist for that entire 2-year period that I had nothing to do with Scientology. Okay, when I left the Sea Org, I'd been in the Sea Org for 4 years. I got a bill for about $40,000. It might have been more, I can't remember right now, but it wasn't $100,000. Okay, so let's see. The question was, a freeloader debt, a freeloader bill is not legally enforceable, even if you were an adult when you did the services or signed your contract or whatever. The reason freeloader bills get enforced is because these bills are being given to people who still consider themselves to be Scientologists, and a Scientologist wants to do more Scientology. But a Scientologist isn't allowed to do more Scientology until they pay the freeloader bill. But if you leave Scientology, you don't have to pay that bill. And even if you stay in Scientology, I don't have any reason to believe that Scientologists think that bill is legally enforceable. Scientologists pay the bill because it's internally enforceable. Okay, what's next? Can the Sea Org exist in countries where Scientology is not considered a religion? Interesting question here. It assumes that the Sea Org even exists. the Sea Org does not exist in any official form. So let's take a version of this question. Can Scientology exist in countries where it's not considered a religion? Yes, and it does. Scientology exists in France where it's not considered a religion. Scientology exists in Russia where it's not considered a religion. Sea Org members could travel to those organizations of Scientology. I guess they can't really call themselves churches. Or maybe they do call themselves churches, but it's not recognized. I'm not sure how the politics work on that. A Sea Org member could travel to one of those organizations and execute orders on behalf of David Miscavige and carry with them the authority of being a Sea Org member. But the Sea Org does not exist. Jeffrey Augustine, I believe on the website called The Money Project. If any of this is inaccurate, I'll correct it in some anecdotes on the video. Wrote up an amazing article about how the Sea Org doesn't officially exist. And I'm going to dig up a link to it, and I'm going to put it in the description of the video down below. Please check it out. So let's see. So I said, let's pretend that this question asks, can the Church of Scientology exist in countries where it's not a religion? Yes. And I don't know what else this question could be referring to. So let's move on. Unless I've missed it, I'd like to see how people, or you, put their lives together when they're first out of Scientology. How do you build your life? Find housing, find work, adjust to life outside of the fence, if you will. What did you do the first day that you shed that Sea Org uniform, moving forward to where you and others are today? Again, there's some assumptions here that when someone left the Sea Org, they left Scientology, and we've already covered that. And in my case, when I left the Sea Org, I was not leaving Scientology. I still had a very significant network to fall back on. I had my family, I had my wife's family, and one thing I'll probably get into at a later point in time is just how much real-world experience I had during my Scientology experience, even though I joined staff at the age of 12. So, okay, I'll cover some of it now. So, okay, I joined staff when I was 12. I then very quickly went to Flag here in Clearwater for full-time study for 3 years. I finished that when I was 15. Then I went back to Philadelphia, and for 2 years, I did nothing but work at the Philadelphia org. 7 days a week, 6 days a week. We did take one day off. 6 days a week, 8 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night, for 2 years. Then I got fed up. That's the short version of that story. And I left staff without a sec check, by the way. Didn't get declared. Left staff without a sec check. Moved to LA. Had nothing to do with Scientology for 2 years. Got sick of that. Moved back to Philadelphia and finished the remaining. I think when I came back to Philadelphia, anyway, I don't want to think about it right now. I either had 2 years left of my contract or 3 years left of my contract when I moved back to Philadelphia. During that entire time where I was finishing out the remaining years of my contract, I was not working for the church from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. I went and got myself a day job. So I had no diploma, but I was certainly competent. I was really good on the computer. I was really good talking to people. I was a good problem solver. I was a good little Scientologist. And I went to a temp agency, and I basically got some great jobs. And I bought a house, so I bought my first house when I was 20 years old. I had perfect credit. I mentioned earlier getting a secured credit card. That's what I did. When I moved to LA, I was 17, and I think the day I turned 18, I went and I got a secured credit card for $500, and then after a year, it gets unsecured, and you've got good credit, and then so by the time I was 20, I was 20 years old when I moved back to Philadelphia to finish my contract. I immediately started getting temp jobs, which moved into permanent jobs because they wanted to hire me. Of course, I lied on my resume and said I had a diploma. And then I had great credit. I was making maybe 40 G's a year. Nothing special, but nothing to sneeze at if you're 20 years old. I got an FHA loan and bought a house. And it was a 5-bedroom house in North Philly. And I just had my staff member friends move in with me and pay me rent. And the house was actually cash flowing. By the time I joined the Sea Org, I owned a freaking house. I didn't even sell the house when I joined the Sea Org. I was like, fuck you guys, I'm not selling my house. My staff member friends were still living in it. It was still paying for itself. I wasn't going to sell it. And so when I left the Sea Org, I had my mom and her husband. I had them to potentially help us. I had my wife's family to potentially help us. I had real world experience. I had real world job experience. I was a homeowner. I actually, cringeworthy here, took out a line of credit on the home that I owned to pay off my freeloader debt. I gave the church $40,000 for the privilege of giving them 4 years of my life. Wish I had that 40 grand back. Okay, so have I addressed this question? Find work. Oh, it's not hard to find work, especially if you're still in Scientology. People will fall over themselves to offer you a job. Actually, that's what happened to me. We were living with my wife's folks, and their neighbor owned one of the local consulting companies here in Clearwater that uses Scientology administrative technology to consult businesses. And so my wife's younger sister was friends with that guy's daughter, and she came home one day and was like, oh, my friend's father has offered Aaron a job. Sight unseen. Never spoken to the guy. He just knew I was in the Sea Org for X number of years and had done X number of X Scientology training, and he's like, I'll take him. And again, that job was only paying me 40 grand a year, but for me, I was wealthy. For me, I was like, because it's one thing to make 40 grand a year when you've got a car payment and insurance and a mortgage and insurance and a girlfriend and all this stuff. It's another thing if you're making 40 grand a year and you have zero bills. All right, and then the story moves on from there, but that's not the purpose of this video. Let's see. Okay, something people rarely discuss is dealing with people that are sure you have to be an idiot, crazy, or a masochist to join Scientology. And someone publicly out and openly an ex-Scientologist, you must occasionally deal with this. Some exes never speak out as they try to hide their past. Okay, I get that. I guess something I have going for me is that I don't come across as an idiot or crazy or a masochist. At least if I do, they only say it behind my back. So I don't really have to deal with that. So a funny little anecdote here is, because our kids go to a local charter school and my wife's on the PTA, we have a lot of friends relating to the school. And a lot of these guys just have no idea that we've ever had anything to do with Scientology. And the other day, we were having a little get-together. Mike Rinder and his wife, Christy, were over. And this was after, of course, the first season of Leah's show had aired. And I'm sort of kind of laughing to myself a little bit on the inside, thinking, how many of these people are wondering what the hell Mike Rinder's doing in my house? And after Mike had left, one of our friends was like, yeah, so what was that guy's last name? That was his smooth way of being like, was that Mike Rinder? He was like, so what was that guy's last name? And I'm like, oh yeah, Rinder. Oh yeah. And how do you know him? It was so funny. But the reason I'm even mentioning this is because this guy had no idea. This guy? He's a friend of ours. He had no idea we had anything to do with Scientology. And he said to me, I've grown up in Clearwater my whole life. I've never had anything but a negative opinion of Scientologists. And to be honest, you're the first person I've ever met who was a Scientologist where there wasn't something obviously wrong with them. So my point here is I don't really have to deal with that perception because if anything, I guess if someone gets to know me, it kind of breaks that perception that they might have had. So I don't really have to deal with it. I understand why people would have that opinion that you have to be those things in order to be a Scientologist, but it's not something that I've ever encountered as a problem. And there's nothing about my past that I'm ashamed of or don't want to talk about, so it just isn't a problem for me. All right, what's next? I would like to have an update on the dog and the neighbor scenario. Did the dog get declared? Is he or she still allowed to visit the neighbor? Oh, this is funny. I should just, to make it easy to share, do like a 3-minute video just about the dog. This is referring to the fact that on the episode of Leah's show where a portion of my story about me and my brother was told, I told Leah that my backyard neighbor was a Scientologist. And Leah says, well, how does that work? Isn't she connected with you by living next to you? And I said, well, no, actually she's connected with me through our dog. When we got declared, the neighbor, she called my wife and said, okay, so let's talk, let's figure out how to handle the disconnection with the children. Because my kids used to go over and play in her yard and stuff. But I don't want to disconnect from the dog. Now, in all fairness, our dog is a pretty awesome dog. And it was an absolutely true story. It was not BS. And the short answer is that yes, she had to disconnect from the dog after the episode aired. I'm not kidding. She had to disconnect from the dog. She wasn't allowed to see the dog anymore. We used to have a chain link fence in our backyard that separated our yard from her yard. And there was a gate. And any time of day, we could just send the dog over there. because she loved the dog. In fact, she would take the dog on errands. She would drive him around town. Most of the people in our neighborhood thought it was her dog because she spent more time publicly with our dog than we did. The dog's a Labradoodle. He's 3/4 poodle, 1/4 lab. He's the most beautiful, well-mannered, cute, fluffy thing you've ever seen. I'll bring him on video sometime. And yeah, I'm not kidding. After the episode aired, she had to build a 6-foot privacy fence between her yards so that the dog wouldn't see her anymore. I'm not lying. It is insane. Okay, next thing. Not able to watch the video yet, but I plan to later today. This is a silly question. It's been bugging the hell out of me. Oh, it's another dog question. Okay, we covered that. If one of the big things in Scientology is to remember your past lives and past events, wouldn't some people undoubtedly have some pretty nasty traumas and thus be suppressive, according to the textbook definition? I get it. This comment came from the video where I explained why a Scientologist who's in good standing with the church could never appear on Leah Remini's TV show. And in that video, I give a technical definition of a suppressive person. It was only a 2-minute explanation. I just don't want to cover that ground again. Please, if you haven't seen that video, just watch it. I put it up just a few days ago. I think it's called Why a Scientologist Couldn't Appear on Leah Remini's show. It has to do with someone, the definition that L. Ron Hubbard gave for why a suppressive person is a suppressive person and how they came to be that way. I'm going to answer this question assuming that someone has already heard that explanation. Okay, if one of the big things in Scientology is to remember your past lives and past events, wouldn't some people undoubtedly have some pretty nasty traumas and thus be suppressive according to the textbook definition? No! Because the textbook definition has nothing to do with whether you remember the incident where you were being completely overwhelmed. In fact, it assumes you don't remember it. It's only whether you're stuck in it. Unknowingly, subconsciously, you've never been able to move forward from that time over the past millennia or trillennia. Just keep in mind, none of this has to make sense. It's just how L. Ron Hubbard explained it. Okay, so it's not whether you contact this incident and remember it in auditing. You can't go, we're talking about, well, you know, what Scientologists believe here. You can't go from not being a suppressive person to then receiving auditing and contacting an incident in your past and then becoming a suppressive person by nature of having contacted the incident. That's not how it works. Okay, and thus be suppressive. And wouldn't it seem, and it would seem, like those people who are in the suppressive, who are suppressive, would need guidance and assistance to get out of that condition. Why is it the church's policy to disconnect from suppressive people who are, per the textbook definition, suppressive, when all they really need is some help? That's a damn good question. And the answer is, L. Ron Hubbard's explanation was, you know what? Because also realize, even though this technical definition to Scientologists makes perfect sense, and it seems like it's very common sense, and it's not really a politicized definition. The fact is, L. Ron Hubbard really had only one definition that mattered for who was a suppressive person, and that is anybody who spoke out or criticized Scientology. So, let's say you have a Scientology critic. In Scientology, the material gives 12 attributes of an antisocial personality, which is the same thing as a suppressive person, and 12 attributes of a social personality. It's not like a Scientologist could take a Scientology critic, like me, and say, you know what? Let's see if Aaron's a suppressive person. Let's compare his conduct and behavior to the 12 attributes of an SP and the 12 attributes of a good person, and let's figure out if he's a good person. And it's not like a Scientologist could go, well, you know, I completed my analysis, and it turns out Aaron's actually not an SP. So maybe we should take some of the things that he's saying to heart. Maybe he's not just saying what he's saying because he wants to destroy us. Maybe he's saying what he's saying because he actually is speaking some truth here. No, that's not how it works. You're not allowed to conclude that someone who's criticizing Scientology isn't a suppressive person. The fact that they are criticizing Scientology makes them a suppressive person. And that's when a Scientologist would, jump through, do all sorts of mental gymnastics to explain how the reason Aaron is doing this is because he is equating Scientology, he thinks Scientology is going to help people, and Aaron can't stand the idea of anybody being helped because he's stuck in this incident from a billion years ago where he was being utterly destroyed and overwhelmed, and he's not able to process information correctly in present time because he's stuck in this incident, and he's equating Scientology with these terrible forces in the past that were trying to destroy him. Anyway, if all this sounds ridiculous, it's because it is. But, you know, when you spent a lot of years figuring out how all of this makes a lot of sense, it doesn't seem so ridiculous. All right, let's see. Did I answer the question? Oh, yeah. L. Ron Hubbard does claim that Scientology could help suppressive people. What he says is, we have a limited amount of time. We have a limited amount of resources. We could help these SPs, but why bother trying to help people who are getting in our way and getting under our feet and making it harder for us to do our job? We'll get around to them eventually when we've got everything else taken care of. Like, literally, that's what he says. We could help them, but we won't because, you know, we don't give a shit about them. All right, let's see. What is next? Okay, it says, I know this would be pure speculation on your part, but do you think we will ever learn the fates of Heber Jensch and Shelley Miscavige? I've heard stories of Church of Scientology members dying and the church never informing their families. Yes, that happens. Yes, we will learn the fates of Heber Jensch and Shelley Miscavige. I'm going to go on the record and say something on this video that I've already said publicly in other podcasts. Shelley Miscavige is fine. People in Scientology do not wonder where Shelley Miscavige is. Sea Org members do not wonder where Shelley Miscavige is. Shelley Miscavige, if she was ever a public figure at all, which she wasn't, but because she traveled with Miscavige and because she went everywhere Miscavige went, some people can call her a public figure, but it's not like Shelley Miscavige was one of these people who was speaking at Scientology events. I would say, without much risk of exaggeration, that 99% of public Scientologists and 90% of staff members and 85% of Sea Org members have never laid eyes on Shelley Miscavige, and if you showed them photos of her, would have no idea who Shelley Miscavige is. Okay, so but if you want to say that she's a public figure because she traveled and you know, like she was a public figure because she was David Miscavige's assistant, not because she was his wife. Okay. And she also probably wouldn't have been his assistant except for the fact that she was his wife. And just because, and so, you know, basically Shelley did, I'm not going to rehash the whole timeline of this thing, but Shelley did some stuff that pissed off Miscavige. It wasn't stuff that should have pissed him off, but it did. He decided he didn't want her around anymore. Didn't want to be, this is my opinion, didn't want to be married to her anymore. Didn't want her to be his assistant anymore. And so she was demoted or transferred to another post. That is why no one has seen or heard from Shelley Miscavige in a long time. The only reason Shelley Miscavige was ever allowed to become friends with Leah Remini is because she was traveling with Miscavige and was his assistant. It's not normal for a Sea Org member to be able to fraternize, it's the real word the Sea Org uses, with public Scientologists. It's not normal for people at international management to be considered public figures. It's not normal for any Sea Org member to be considered a public figure. So if I seem like I have zero concern about Shelley Miscavige, it's because she has simply gone from being chairman of the board's assistant, which is David Miscavige's post in the Sea Org, to just being a normal Sea Org member. She's just a normal Sea Org member. Am I supposed to care more about Shelley Miscavige's fate in the Sea Org than any other Sea Org member? She's just another Sea Org member now. That's why she's not allowed to send Leah Remini letters anymore. Now, let me be very crystal clear about one thing. I don't mean to imply in the least that Leah is being disingenuous in her concern for Shelley. Leah's just looking at it from a different perspective than I am. I'm looking at it from the perspective of someone who was on staff and in the Sea Org for 15 years. Leah's looking at it from the perspective of someone who had Shelley as a personal friend. It's not normal for friends to drop off the face of the earth. That's not normal. But in the Sea Org it is. So I see it as normal. And I completely understand why Leah doesn't. And that's legit. That's okay. we don't have to see it the same way. We're looking at it from different points of view. And Leah has no way of knowing that Shelly's okay, that she's not being held against her will. And that's legit. There's nothing disingenuous or false about that concern. I just don't share the same concern because I've traveled a different path. That's all. Okay. Heber Jensch, we probably will not learn, actually, about the fate of Heber Jensch until he passes away and someone finds his death certificate. That's unfortunately how I feel. Okay, I too would love to see videos about the beginning stages of Scientology, especially for those joining and recently not born in. Okay, that's going to be a subject of another video. That's all the same comment. I don't mean to be rude. No, that's not really a question. Oh, here we go. One question comes to mind. Does the Church of Scientology spend money for retirement homes or communities for those faithful Sea Org members who are too old and or too ill to continue working, or just any Scientologist in general? Many Christian denominations choose to provide such resources for aging and ailing members. How does Miscavige deal with this issue? If he has the funds to bring in anchor businesses, he certainly has the money to care for those who have been loyal, and the PR would be great. Yeah, this is a great question, and it probably deserves a thorough treatment in another video. The Church of Scientology does not have any retirement plans set up for any Sea Org members. In order to have a retirement plan, it would sort of imply you ever made money in the first place, which you didn't. The Sea Org does not have any nursing facilities or assisted living facilities or anything. Most commonly, when Sea Org members get too old to be able to keep the schedule, they're put on a reduced schedule, but still required to do some work. Eventually, when Sea Org members become too much of a problem due to the amount of care that they require or the amount of medical bills that they're racking up, they're simply kicked to the curb. Especially if they're from countries that have socialized medicine. They're fitness boarded out of the Sea Org, not the same thing as being declared. It basically just says you're no longer fit. You're no longer qualified to be in the Sea Org. And they're kicked out and they're sent home. Maybe they're lucky enough to have their plane ticket paid for to go home. I know of some Sea Org members who did wind up in some sort of assisted living facility, but it was usually paid for because the person, let's say, had received some sort of inheritance or some sort of a trust fund from through the family, and the Sea Org member, a Sea Org member who has any money stashed away will be paying for their own medical bills in late stages of life. The Sea Org does not pay for that, and this is something I'm going to give further treatment to in a later video. The Church of Scientology might be the biggest welfare queen in the United States, and I apologize if that might be. I'm hoping there's no racial component to that phrase. If there is, that's not why I'm using it that way. The church does not provide insurance for Sea Org members. All Sea Org members are on Medicare. Please understand this. Every Sea Org member in the United States is on Medicare. Medicaid. Medicaid is on government provided and subsidized medical care. If a Sea Org member gets an abortion, they're going to the free clinic. If a Sea Org member, basically, I'm just telling you, the Sea Org has billions of dollars and does not even pay for the medical care of Sea Org members who are working 100 hours a week for $50 a week. I don't know what the regulations are surrounding the administration of Medicaid and the qualifications for Medicaid, but it seems to me that state agencies might want to take a look at how a nonprofit organization that amasses billions of dollars in assets is relying on the government dime to provide health care for its religious volunteers. It really is disgusting, and it doesn't get any better when you're 60, 65, 70, 75 years old. It just doesn't. On the same subject, I have heard that there is a former Sea Org member from international management who left the Sea Org, is still in Scientology, and bought some nursing home in Northern California, or I might have some of the details of this wrong. And there is some things set up. I don't know where some old Sea Org members who simply don't have a home country with socialized medicine to be sent back to, or who simply don't have any friends or family to fall back on, where some Sea Org members have started to be sent. I would love to know what the actual standard of care that is provided at this facility is, because remember, when Scientologists are dealing with Scientologists, you're not allowed to ever get the authorities involved. You're not allowed to get the regulators involved. You're not allowed to do any of that. So I would question how much accountability there is for the standard of care being provided in a assisted living facility that's being run by a former Sea Org member, being paid for maybe with Sea Org funds. That's where I say I don't really know how this thing is paid for. But I didn't want to neglect to mention that I have heard of something like that. But of course, the profit is going into the pocket of a Scientologist who's running the facility, and that could get very interesting if someone were to look into that. Okay, Aaron, what do people do in Clearwater? What kind of jobs are there? Obviously, there's Flag and the Church of Scientology, but what else is manufactured or created, and what is the GNP there? How can an entire downtown be empty? So strange. Okay, I actually answered this question on YouTube, but I want to answer it here, because I realized that I might have created an incorrect impression that the entire city of Clearwater is just a dump and that there's nothing going on. That is not true. That is not what I meant to communicate. It's downtown Clearwater, where the Church of Scientology is located and where all of the Sea Org members work. That is a ghost town. Clearwater is much bigger than that. There's also Clearwater Beach, which is still part of Clearwater. Clearwater Beach is happening, man. I mean, that place is busy all the time. You have the eastern portion of Clearwater, where you have the Countryside Mall. There's plenty of thriving businesses in Clearwater. I didn't make it sound like the whole place was just a dump. So here was my answer. It's downtown Clearwater that is a ghost town. I'm just going to read my answer. But the entire city of Clearwater is not that way. There's actually a lot going on in Clearwater, just not downtown. I would say that the city of Clearwater has the exact same kinds of jobs and activities as any other medium-sized Florida coastal city. It's really just the downtown that feels like something out of a strange movie. And in downtown, it's not that there's zero businesses. About a quarter of the business fronts are filled. But there's almost zero body traffic visible during many times of the day, including what would, in a normal town, be busy times. This is because all of the Sea Org members are inside the buildings working, and all of the Scientologists are also in the buildings, either going on course or getting auditing. They just do not have time to relax or eat outside or have a drink. And if they do want to have a drink, they don't want to do it in front of Sea Org members. So they'll go to a bar in Dunedin before they'll go to a bar in downtown Clearwater. Also, Flag, this is important, this is what I wanted to say. Flag has its own restaurants and cafes inside these buildings, inside their buildings. And these places, they do not charge tax, they don't charge sales tax, and Sea Org members can't take tips. You don't have to tip them. You don't have to tip any Sea Org member. So if you're eating at a restaurant that's staffed by Sea Org members, you're not paying tax and you're not paying a tip. It's actually cheaper to eat inside a church building at one of their nice restaurants than it is to eat in one of the local restaurants. And this is just one of the ways where the church is slitting its own throat as far as its relationship with the community. If they wanted to foster good relationships, set it up so that Scientologists are actually spending money in the local community. Set it up so that business owners have an incentive to want the Scientologists to be there. The Scientology cruise ship, the Freewinds, when it goes to port, they kick everyone off the ship and make them spend money in the port to keep the people in the port wanting the ship to come back. If Flag would just operate the same way, they wouldn't have as many problems. All right, I think we're getting close to the 1 hour mark, which is not, I didn't truly intend to talk that long. But that's okay. I'm going to do a whole bunch of these. Look, any question that you have on any video that I do, put it in the comments. I will absolutely copy and paste it, and I will address it in a future video. No question about it. Okay, guys, that's it for now. Hope this was fun and insightful, and I will see you soon. Bye.